Hey everybody, my name is Lindsay Harper. I'm going to be facilitating and moderating this particular panel on nuclear weapons, and you are going to get a great update, very interesting information. We've got our four panelists here. I'm going to ask for them to introduce themselves, please.
Jay Coghlan, Nuclear, New Mexico.
Ralph Hutchison with the Oak Ridge Environmental Peace Alliance in Tennessee.
Joseph Rodgers with Tri-Valley Cares in California.
Lily Adams with Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility.
Thank you all very much. And so what we'll do is we will get into our panelists will have their talks, and then we will have questions at the end. Okay, so please take note of your questions and we'll get to it. So thank you. When you all are ready, I am ready as well.
So we're going to follow the fact sheets. We're going to do this column and then this column and this column in case you're following along on your at home.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about nuclear weapons modernization and my sort of overview. I'm going to talk about modernization, what it entails, and some of the most persuasive arguments that I've found against the modernization projects that are ongoing. So current modernization projects can be broken down into Obama administration's proposals and the Trump administration's proposals. So the Obama administration wanted to pursue a $1.2 trillion modernization project over 30 years to build a B-61-12 gravity bomb for the Air Force, a long-range standoff cruise missile, air-launched cruise missile, also for the Air Force, a new capabilities for the Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missile, which is launched out of silos, also for the Air Force, and a new capabilities for the submarine launch cruise missile, submarine launch ballistic missile, the Trident. Now, in addition to the Obama administration's proposals, the recent nuclear posture review by the Trump administration introduced two new requests for an additional lower yield submarine launch ballistic missile and a submarine launched cruise missile. So together, all of these proposals are what we talk about when we talk about nuclear weapons modernization. The warheads for the B-61-12, the gravity bomb that was introduced by the Obama administration, are being built at Los Alamos National Lab, and the long-range standoff cruise missile warhead is being built at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. The warheads for the other weapons are in sort of a limbo status that I'm sure we might get into later. So now I'll talk briefly about some of the most persuasive arguments against all of these modernization projects. In my opinion, the number one most persuasive argument is that most of these new weapons are introducing lower yield capabilities for all of for the nuclear weapons themselves. And that introduces new incentives for nuclear weapons planners to use nuclear weapons, to actually use them. And one example of this is the long-range standoff cruise missile, which has been described by officials in the Department of Defense as being a more usable nuclear weapon. And as we introduce these lower yields, it's a real concern that policymakers are already describing these modernization projects as being, considering their use. Secondarily, as new modifications are being made to the warheads of these new weapons, it's possible that this introduces more incentives for nuclear weapons testing. As we change the warheads, we might need to retest, and that's something that has not been done in the United States for a very long time. Resuming testing would be environmentally very destructive, and it would cost a lot of money to build new facilities for testing. The recent budget request actually allocates more money for increasing our test readiness, and a big fear is that as we pursue these modernization projects, we might need to resume testing, and I really doubt that the people in Las Vegas want a resumption of nuclear weapons testing in their backyards. It would be devastating for the economy there as well. A third argument against the modernization projects is that the institutions, the labs, and the government is not really capable of pursuing all of these modernization projects at the same time. They cost too much. The Obama administration's proposals would have cost $1.3 trillion, as I've mentioned, And with the addition of the Trump administration's proposals, that cost is going to skyrocket. The labs are already overburdened, and we don't have the infrastructure necessary to build all of these, or to pursue all of these projects. And as we go towards considering constructing these facilities, as Jay is going to talk more about, we don't really have accountability with the contractors that would actually be pursuing these construction projects. So we don't have the sort of infrastructure necessary. So to sum up, there's sort of three very, I think, persuasive arguments against nuclear weapons modernization. The first is that they're introducing low yields, which introduces new incentives for nuclear weapons use. Second, that testing might be necessary as we begin to change our warhead design. And third, that institutions that would be building these weapons simply don't have the capability, the capacity to pursue all of these modernization projects in tandem. Thanks.
So I get to take the extra time?
No.
Joseph? Great. All of this is being done in the name of deterrence. I've heard that all my life. That's why we have nuclear weapons, is to deter. The real fact is that we maintain thousands of weapons in order to keep a nuclear warfighting capability. And if you want to document that, just Google 2013 Nuclear Posture Review Implementation Plan, and you'll see that explicitly stated. We do not rely on minimal deterrence, and we will keep what's called counterforce capabilities. That means nuclear warfighting. Now, to do all this, we of course have production facilities, and the American public is not aware of the fact that the U.S. is completely rebuilding functionally the production side of the nuclear weapons complex. And weapons components can be simplistically divided into three parts. That's all the thousands of non-nuclear components. And the U.S. has already built a new Kansas City plant for that purpose. And what Ralph and I are going to talk about are new facilities for plutonium pits. Ralph will talk about highly enriched uranium. Now, plutonium pits are basically a softball-sized core that are the triggers, also called the primaries, for nuclear weapons. It's always been the choke point for resumed U.S. industrial scale production ever since the FBI raid investigating environmental crimes shut down the Rocky Flats plant in 1989. Just this last May 10th, the National Nuclear Security Administration announced that it wanted to do at least, and underline the word at least, because that's new wiggle room. They used to say ceilings, but now it's at least 30 pits per year at Los Alamos and 30 pits per year at the Savannah River site. A fundamental point that I can't stress enough. Future pit production is not to maintain the safety and reliability of the existing nuclear weapons stockpile. It is specifically for speculative new designs called the interoperable warheads, in which they plan 3 types that altogether would cost the taxpayer more than $40 billion. So it's just kind of nuts to have this expanded pit production capability, period. It's also important to note that they will not produce exact replicas of existing types of pits. They may heavily modify them. The consequences of this is that it could undermine stockpile reliability and prompt the U.S. back into testing, which Joseph has already referred to. I can't possibly cover this subject, so I'll just close by noting 2 things. We should be arguing that funding be cut for plutonium pit production, especially in light of what I said. It's not to maintain the safety and reliability of the existing stockpile. And the second point I would close with, this is for us, not necessarily for meeting with Congress. but there's going to have to be extensive future review under the National Environmental Policy Act for expanded pit production, both nationally to expand the number to begin with, and secondarily site-specific, and especially at the Savannah River site. And then I'll just close by noting that I really like questions, and since I have to stop now, ask questions later.
Thank you.
So my job is to talk about the second part of this middle column about the uranium processing facility bomb plant in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And I want to start by asking all of you to help me just with the language part. Would you repeat after me, UPF bomb plant?
UPF bomb plant.
Great. I hope in any meeting you're in where you discuss the uranium processing facility or the UPF, you include bomb plant, because that's what it is. Originally, in 2005, they announced that they were going to consolidate all the enriched uranium operations at Y-12 into one big, new, shiny, environmentally friendly, safer building. And they called it a big box. But what has happened when the cost got up to $19 billion and the schedule started to disappear into infinity, they scaled back the project, and now it is just to build nuclear weapons secondaries. It's a bomb plant only. But it's called the Uranium Processing Facility, or the UPF, which doesn't sound like a bomb plant. So try to attach that, UPF bomb plant, when you talk about it. Here are the issues. We don't need to make any more secondary. We don't need to make as many secondaries as this bomb plant is sized to on an ongoing basis for our nuclear warheads or bombs. The Department of Energy admitted in its environmental impact statement that it could fulfill its mission to safely maintain the current stockpile with a production capacity of less than 10 warheads per year in a facility. But they are building a supersized UPF bomb plant that will produce 80 thermonuclear secondaries per year, or have that capacity. And surprise, surprise, 30 plus 50 plutonium pits equals 80. So basically, the plan is to reconstitute our entire production capacity so that we can replace our entire nuclear stockpile every 20 years with new nuclear weapons if we want. The original cost of the UPF was $1.5 billion. The now announced cost is $6.5 billion. But in fact, it will cost a lot more than that. And when they authorized the beginning of construction a month and a half ago, they said that we have prepared a baseline cost estimate and a baseline schedule. And so we immediately said, oh, this is great. What are they? And they have declined to provide that to the public. There's no compelling need for us to know how much of our tax dollars they're eventually going to spend on this bomb plant in Oak Ridge, or when they're going to get it done. And meanwhile, they're shoveling, in the budget that's being discussed now, $700 million to Bechtel to build the UPF bomb plant. So, what to say in our meetings, and these things are on the fact sheet. The thought of spending billions of dollars on a new nuclear bomb plant at the same time we're asking North Korea and Iran to forego nuclear weapons is clearly irrational, right? It undermines our efforts to constrain the proliferation of nuclear weapons in other countries. Second, the United States should not be investing billions in modernizing our nuclear weapons and our nuclear bomb plants because this escalation has already triggered a new global nuclear arms race. And that is the opposite of making us more secure, which is ostensibly what nuclear weapons are doing. And finally, taxpayers have a right to know what is being done with our money. The baseline cost estimate and schedule for the UPF bomb plant should be released immediately to the public. And Jay has proposed, and we didn't get this on the fact sheet, but it's perfectly reasonable to talk with them about saying, put a pin in this, fence off all funding for the UPF until we see the numbers. Till you tell us what it's going to cost, stop shoveling money to Bechtel.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about the policies we have around the use of nuclear weapons. So there's two main bills that I'm going to talk about. But just for some context, a lot of the nuclear weapons policy that we have was created back in the Cold War in a very different situation than we are in now, but has not been updated. And in this administration, we're kind of seeing this questioning of those policies. It's kind of brought up this debate because this is kind of a more dangerous and unpredictable administration, and now this is a concern for people again. So we're starting to have this debate, which is why these bills kind of are existing right now in Congress. And it's good, it's very important that we are having this debate. So we have two main asks under this category, and the bill numbers and bill names are on the fact sheet, so you don't have to memorize these or write these down. But both of these bills reduce the risk of nuclear weapons and enhance our global security. And so the first is the Restricting First Use of Nuclear Weapons Act, or Senate Bill 200 and House Bill 669. So our current policy in the United States is that the president, whoever that may be, has the sole authority to launch nuclear weapons in a first strike capacity. So not in retaliation to an attack on the US, but a first strike. And the president does not need to consult with anyone in the military or the government, although we would hope that they would, but it's not necessary right now. So this bill would require instead that the president gets congressional approval to launch nuclear weapons for a first strike. So we see this as a very common sense bill. We have a government based on checks and balances. This is a check on executive power to make sure that this monumental decision is not just resting in the hands of one person. So this also goes back to the Constitution, which gives Congress the sole authority to declare war. We would absolutely say that launching a nuclear weapon in a first strike capacity is a declaration of war. I can't think of anything that would be more of a declaration of war. So this authority should rest with Congress. That's what is stated in the Constitution. And the current policy that we have, which is one person making this decision, leaves us really vulnerable to mistakes and miscommunication. There have been a number of times in our history where we have come within minutes of launching nuclear weapons at another country under the mistaken belief that we were already under attack. So these kinds of mistakes and miscommunications happen. And if just one person has the decision-making power, it's much more likely that we're going to launch nuclear weapons when we shouldn't. I mean, really, we should never launch nuclear weapons, but much more likely that we would launch nuclear weapons in a mistaken belief that we needed to defend ourselves. And something that you can also say to argue for this bill, depending on who you're talking to, is that this is especially important in this administration because we do have a very volatile president right now who's known to be impulsive. I would say that this bill should exist regardless of who is the president, regardless of the majority in Congress. This is a nonpartisan issue, even a Democrat. Anyone should not, no one person should have the sole authority to launch nuclear weapons. But if you're meeting with someone who you know is probably not the biggest fan of Trump, you could say that it's especially important right now. So the current status of this bill is that in the Senate, it's been introduced by Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts. It currently has 13 co-sponsors, and they haven't been pushing it that much recently, so this is an opportunity for us to go into these meetings and work to get new co-sponsors and kind of re-energize the bill. And then in the House, which the House bill was introduced by Representative Ted Lieu from California, and this bill has 80 co-sponsors right now since I last checked. The most recent one was, most recent edition was in mid-April. So this is still, people are currently co-sponsoring this bill and signing on. So this kind of has momentum that we can build on. The next bill is, the title is called to establish the policy of the United States regarding the no first use of nuclear weapons. It's a weird bill name. I call it the No First Use Bill for short. It's House Bill 4415. So this is a very interesting bill because it's the simplest bill I've ever seen. It's literally one sentence long. What it says is that if this were enacted, it is the policy of the United States to not use nuclear weapons first. So the reason that this bill has been introduced is that currently the U.S. does not have a no first use policy. So we reserve the right to use nuclear weapons before we are even in a conflict or in response to a conventional military attack against the United States. Some nuclear weapon states do have no first use policies, like China. Most nuclear weapon states kind of reserve this right to use nuclear weapons first. So the reason that we should have a no first use policy for nuclear weapons is, first, we have an unparalleled conventional military that can address any sort of conflict that we might find ourselves in. We spend massive amounts of money on it, and there is no militarily justifiable reason that we should need to use nuclear weapons first. That is a massive escalation, and we couldn't think of a situation where that would be appropriate. But also beyond militarily, just morally, there is no justification for using nuclear weapons first on another country. The second piece, well, Jay kind of touched on this earlier, that we are often told that the sole role of nuclear weapons is deterrence. That's what we would hope, that we do not see nuclear weapons as war-fighting tools because we know how terribly destructive they are. Having a first strike, or not having a no first strike policy, means that we are seeing these weapons as war-fighting tools. They should exist only as a deterrent. Most of your members of Congress that you meet with will, believe in this system of deterrence. And so we should not be seeing these as something to use. We should be seeing nuclear weapons only, the sole purpose is just to make sure that they actually are never used in conflict. So where this stands in Congress is that it's only introduced in the House, so there is no Senate companion bill, so this is not something to talk about with your senators. It was introduced by Representative Adam Smith from Washington State, and it currently doesn't have any co-sponsors. So again, this is an opportunity for us to build on it and to get more co-sponsors for this bill. I will say that this is kind of a more forward-looking piece of legislation for maybe your most progressive members of Congress. I would first check to see if they have co-sponsored the first bill we talked about, the restricting first use of nuclear weapons. If they have, then this is a great next step because it kind of builds on restricting first use to having no first use. And that's it. Sorry, I went a little long.
No worry about it. Thank you very much.
We're good.
So definitely want to thank our panel. That was awesome. I want to open up the floor to questions. Who's got questions? Diane?
You want to take over?
Ooh, I don't think that we have that in our materials.
I'm going to repeat the question. Diane, you asked if there's a list of the 13 people who support the bill, who are co-signing the bill.
So I don't think that we have that printed out in our packets, but you can go to congress.gov and just type in the bill number. That's the #1 tool that I use to find your list, and you can refine it by state so you can see immediately. Yeah, that's what I'd suggest.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Questions?
This is for Ralph.
Thank you, Betsy. I'll tell you later.
Did you define secondary?
So what's called the physics package in a thermonuclear weapon has two parts. J's part, the plutonium pit, is the trigger. It's a little atomic bomb, and it is used to trigger the thermonuclear part of the bomb, which is the secondary. So the pit is called a primary, as in one, and the secondary is the second part of the bomb. That's why it has that name.
That's a good question. Thank you.
Since we have a little time, Lindsay, could they reiterate starting with Jay?
No. Everything he said.
What was the question?
You're asking to reiterate
Yes,
the secondary?
yes.
Do you mind the question?
From their opening statements, can they delve in a little more? Do we have time?
So I think it would be more helpful, since our purpose is to try to focus rather than go farther into the weeds on the specific stuff we're going to be talking about. It'd be more helpful to be able to talk specifically to answer specific questions. We could all talk about this for hours, but it's just going to fill up people's heads with stuff that they're going to wish wasn't there tomorrow.
Absolutely.
What's your question? I want to make sure we understand your question.
I just wanted to make sure everybody's clear on the ask and to know what the data is. Because I'm a little bit.
So you want to know the asks?
Yeah, to make sure everybody understands.
I think by reiterating, she's asking for a briefer summary.
Yeah, an overview of what they already said and to convey.
Are you talking about the pits per se? You were on the first hunt for weapons. That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
Well, on the plutonium pits, there is a recent development that we could support. And you heard my comments that future pit production is not to maintain the safety and reliability of the existing stockpile, and instead it's for future interoperable warheads. Now, just last week, the House Appropriations Committee redirected the National Nuclear Security Administration's $53 million request for interoperable warheads. It explicitly redirected that money into a pro and con study of you might call it a conventional life extension program for the Air Force's Minuteman III warhead versus the interoperable warhead. So in effect, House Energy and Water canceled, in effect, the interoperable warhead, again redirecting it towards this comparative study. And you know, this is a very recent development, so it's not in our material here. But you know, at least speaking for Nuke Watch, and I would think all of us, that is clearly something that we can support and could lead to the cancellation of the interoperable warhead for starters, which again is the driver for expanded pit production. So this actually comes home to both Los Alamos and the Savannah River site.
That's exactly what I was trying to get at. Thank you so much, Jay, as to give an alternative as to A through D.
And this is a major alternative. If we can only get the Senate to pass it as well and the President to sign it, that's a big victory.
Thank you.
Jay, could you define interoperable nuclear
Yeah.
weapons?
Yeah, and you know, this gets into the weeds a little bit, which Ralph hates, but briefly. The warhead for the Air Force's intercontinental ballistic missiles, it's the W-78, and the Navy has a warhead, the W-88, which is sub-launched. This interoperable warhead is supposed to be able to be carried by both platforms, both the land-based ICBMs and the Navy's Trident missile. So that's why it's so-called interoperable. I'm not going to, don't let me go into why it's not actually interoperable. That's another issue. But it's a crazy notion. And also, I haven't mentioned this, but the Navy does not want the interoperable warhead. That's on record. You can go to the Nuke Watch website and find a 2012. Oh, it is. Never mind. Well, it's on our record. Okay. And so the Obama administration actually delayed the interoperable warhead for 5 years. Now the Trump administration is bringing it back. But as stated, House Energy and Water, well, now it's the entire Appropriations Committee, redirected that money. Now, $53 million is chump change, of course, right, in the scheme of things. Having said that, the interoperable warhead, according to the Trump administration, is supposed to go to $448 million by 2023, and the second type of interoperable warhead to start in that same year. And altogether, the three types would cost more than $40 billion. So let's kill it now.
That's almost real money.
Yeah.
So if I might add a little bit more on the Navy doesn't want the interoperable warhead. The Navy also used to have a sea-launched cruise missile, which was one of the proposals by the Trump administration. We used to have nuclear-armed Tomahawk, and the Navy was one of the driving forces for us eliminating the nuclear-armed Tomahawk. And now the Trump administration is trying to force a new sea-launched cruise missile onto the Navy. And so there's probably some interagency debates going on about that.
The driving force for these is clearly has nothing to do with military necessity or defense of the United States. It's about the money. It's about continuing to fund these contractors, and that's true of the warhead systems, it's true of the bomb plants, it's true of the idea to repurpose the MOX facility to turn into a plutonium pit manufacturing facility they've never done before at Savannah River. It's all about the money.
Well, just for clarification, because your cynicism was saying, Expanded production is not to maintain safety and reliability of existing nuclear weapons. It is for new nuclear weapons design. So the first line, that's what we're supposed to be providing kits for, correct? For the safety and reliability of our current stockpile.
That's the official line.
That's the
Yes.
official line. So that's what we need to remember in simple terms. And this pit facility has already been defeated, brought up 15 years ago at Savannah Riverside. And a lot of the people here,
Yeah, just as clarification, Bobby Paul is talking about the modern pit facility, that's with capital letters.
right,
And Congress declined it in 2008 was when it was actually killed.
right.
But that was an initial proposal to do 450 pits per year. A specific congressman asked him why 450, and they couldn't say. So then they went down to 250, then they went down to 125, then now they're down to at least 80.
Right. And 50,
There has never been a rationale for expanded pit production.
right, right. I just want to make sure those of us, especially in the Southeast, know that this, there's been a lot of activism all over the country, and the Southeast came together against that. And now here it's whack-a-mole again, and it's coming up because Mox is, well, Kerry, we think that he's nixed it for good, but we don't know what Lindsey Graham's going to pull out of his ass. Pardon me.
You had a question? Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't sure if your hand was up or not.
Yeah, it is, actually.
Okay,
Yes.
yes.
And this kind of follows up a little bit on the pit production. Do we have any proof that new pit production is driven by the interoperable warhead?
Yes. Briefly, it's specifically stated in the fiscal year 2019 and in the safe budget that they're going to use a quote W87-like pit for the interoperable warhead. And I can supply you with the citations, later. But on that note, and the W87 is obviously a certain type of pit. I want to underline the hyphen like. It won't be exact replicas. I forget which workshop I've said this in. Won't be exact replicas. This raises the future issues of can we be fully confident in the reliability of the pit when we cannot full-scale test it, or alternatively, will this push the U.S. back into testing? So there's that.
I had a question. So in the back of the fact sheet, it says how the long-range standoff weapon is redundant to the B6112. I just wanted maybe a little bit more clarification on how it makes it redundant.
You want to take that, Joseph?
Sure. So both the LRSO, the long-range standoff warhead weapon, and the B61-12 would fit on bombers that the Air Force would be flying, and there's not really a need to have a gravity bomb and a air-launched cruise missile because they both fit on similar platforms. They both would be targeting, the justification that the administration has given for why they need an LRSO is that if a bomber were to use the LRSO, it would be able to launch without flying into enemy airspace. But at the same time, the administration is building new bombers, new delivery vehicles that are super stealthy. So they don't really need to be pursuing super stealthy bombers that can fly over enemy airspace and then also want the ability to stand off from enemy airspace to drop gravity bombs.
Ralph, would you mind repeating the three main asks that you mentioned for meetings?
When you get as old as me, ask me to remember something is pretty challenging. Thanks. Well, these are also on the fact sheet.
Where are they out in the fact sheet?
On the back there,
Isn't it the lead?
Down near the bottom,
He laid out the fact sheet.
next to the last paragraph, the UPF is a multi-billion-dollar investment that undermines U.S. efforts to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. In other words, do as we say, not as we do. We're telling North Korea and Iran they can't pursue nuclear capabilities. Meanwhile, we're investing billions in a bomb plant. This is also a, it talks here about the taxpayers having a right to know about the baseline cost estimate. Third paragraph from the bottom, how much we will ultimately pay to modernize the enriched uranium operations at Y-12. Started out at 1.5, it's now at 6.5. Other federal agencies tell us the number is going to go higher and higher and higher. So all of these things. And then the third ask was that we should not be investing billions modernizing our weapons and bomb plants because it is triggering a new global nuclear arms race. Our investments are they're not being matched because we're probably outspending 10-1 Russia or China, but they are aggressively moving to modernize as well because we are, be clear, we have started the new global nuclear arms race with our investments and our announcements about modernization. And this is counterproductive in terms of security, which is what nuclear weapons were theoretically about. It's counterproductive to start a new global nuclear arms race.
Thank you.
For the restricting the first use.
I'm not speaking up just a little bit.
Restricting the first use bills.
Thank
What's
you.
the arguments against supporting that?
Against
Supporting
the bill?
What, like if we go to a meeting and.
Yeah.
Could you repeat what he said?
So the question is, why would someone not support restricting the first use of nuclear weapons, right? What would be the argument against that bill? So I think for your hardcore deterrent believers, they want the kind of like the most flexible deterrent strategy, which would mean including the first use of nuclear weapons. That this gives us a stronger, kind of posture towards other countries that not only do we have nuclear weapons, we're willing to use them first. So like, don't mess with us. So people feel that we're like giving something up by restricting the first use. There's also this question that has come up with some members around the constitutionality of this, because while the Constitution says that Congress is the sole, or has the sole authority to declare war, there's also in the Constitution this idea that the commander-in-chief, the president, can mobilize forces and use whatever weapons and, war fighting tools he wants, or she wants. And so there's been this question of, can we restrict the commander-in-chief's ability to use weapons? So it's this kind of like constitutional debate that doesn't have a necessarily clear answer. But we would absolutely argue that this is a declaration of war, only Congress can declare war.
Could I briefly add?
Yeah.
Forever, that being 60 years plus in nuclear weapons policies, the U.S. has deliberately maintained a posture of ambiguity, and it uses that word, ambiguity, and that's got extended at times into like Nixon and the madman theory, that kind of thing. So this ambiguity is absolutely intentional and deliberate, and I will use this to plug Daniel Ellsberg's new book, Read Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner, and he does very much mention what I just mentioned. So again, it's a deliberate policy of ambiguity.
The last thing I'll say also, which I meant to bring in my original piece, was that something you might hear is that, well, we don't have time to go to Congress to, get approval from them. When we need to launch nuclear weapons, we need to do it quickly. But this bill really specifies that this is for a first strike, when we would have the time to deliberate, hopefully, that we would be deliberating and making sure that, this is the time to use them. And so this is it. The bill specifically says that the president would still have the sole authority to launch nuclear weapons if we had been attacked or knew that we were under attack. So that is something worth clarifying, because I have heard that in meetings as well. Like, Congress moves so slowly, this isn't practical, but it's really specifically for the first strike attack.
Real quick, Jay, do you mind read the book title that you just
Confessions of a Nuclear
It's called the Doomsday Machine.
Oh, excuse me. That's the subtitle.
Yeah.
What I just said. You're right.
Doomsday Machine.
Doomsday Machine. Highly recommended.
It's wonderful.
So,
And you had a question?
Yeah, and I think this might be relevant to some other communities. I'm from Burlington, Vermont. 18 F-35s are supposedly going to come to our community, to our municipal Burlington airport in a year. We asked them, will nuclear weapons be stored at our airport? They all say no. Are they just lying? Or, in fact, one person said, when the time comes for because they're nuclear capable, that's what they're made for, that they will fly somewhere else and pick up the nuclear weapons, and that at present, it's training for the pilots. Now, for us, we're trying to get Burlington to agree to a nuclear weapon, a nuclear-free zone, not just nuclear weapons, but nuclear energy or anything. I mean, do you think they would admit that they could agree with that? Or is that a good point to try to push them on?
I don't know what their plan is, or whether they're telling you the truth. In the era of Trump, what is truth anyway? But typically, the non-denial, if they were going to, it would be a non-denial, as we neither confirm nor deny the presence of nuclear warheads. So if they're giving you a flat denial, maybe it's real. Maybe that's true, I don't know.
But you would find that the security requirements would be very high. And not that I have looked into it or will look into it, but you could ferret that out. I think it extremely unlikely at that particular airport.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Thank you.
I have two questions. I guess the first one is, I understand them not funding the cleanup because nobody wants to clean up their room, and all their lives they don't want to clean up. But spending this money on something that's totally useless, building pits we don't need, building secondaries we have plenty of, it's a total waste of money. Aren't there fiscal conservatives in Congress that are objecting to this useless expenditure, number one? I guess the second question is, where's the outrage? I mean, it doesn't seem to me that the facts ever moved anyone. It's emotions. So strategically, do any of you have any insights into, is it useful to get emotional with these congressmen and senators? Because it seems to me the facts aren't going to move them. I reference John Glenn and Lisa Crawford. Lisa cried on his shoulder and he said, well, I'll do something about it. And so in that one instance, for example, emotion seemed to have moved the bar. What's your feeling about getting emotional with these people about these basically outrageous situations?
Maybe it depends what emotions you use. I wouldn't advise yelling at them because I don't think that would lead to any constructive response on their part. But if you can work up some tears, Jay. I mean, I think you can speak passionately about the things that you believe in and the things that you want. And I think we should, because you do reach people through their heart as well as their head. But I stop short of sort of straying away from the reality of the world that they live in to be manipulative or something like that. I think a way to productively demonstrate to them that you're not just providing them with data points, but that you care about this, and you hope that they care about this, and the world needs to care about this, because even our presidents have made statements that show that this is bigger than just a policy issue. It has to do with the continued life on the planet, and there is some recognition of that.
And if I can add, you said something to the effect of how these nuclear weapons are useless, or this is for all stuff that's useless. Two counterpoints to that. The United States has repeatedly threatened at least 30 times to use nuclear weapons. And the threat itself is use, okay? So this has happened, to start with the Korean War, start with Komoy and Matsu, if you know what that is, with China, go to the Cuban Missile Crisis, go to Berlin, et cetera, et cetera. So the threat of use is a use and coercive in and of itself. Now, in a different dimension, all this work is not useless. It is very much enriching Bechtel, Lockheed Martin, Honeywell.
And the workers at the facility.
Yeah, and on an interesting point, at the 3 weapons labs, which are Sandia, Los Alamos, and Livermore, the directors wear 2 hats. First is as lab directors. The head is as presidents of the executive committee of the for-profit limited liability corporation running the labs. I believe the same is true for the production plants as well. And if you think I'm suggesting that profit motive is driving a lot of this, I am definitely, Bob, I like the Bob Dylan quote, money doesn't talk, it swears. So, profit motive is driving the whole thing.
Folks, I figure we can stop maybe around 12:55, which means we have, if I can add 7 minutes, 8 minutes, 8 minutes. Couple more questions.
Yeah, just two questions. Is there a place to go to find the amount of money each representative and senator has received from, say, Lockheed or Bechtel, and isn't that relevant to when we go? I mean, I found, for example, that on the subject of the NRA, Pat Leahy has received $7,000 from the NRA.
There are websites that track that, Robin, but I don't know off the top of my head what they are. But if you Google around, I think you'll find stuff.
Probably don't want to bring that up in your meeting.
And the other thing, I see that it's only at the very end of the one question about smarter policies of mentioning the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Are you downsizing that as really a relevant subject to bring up or not?
Well, until the President signs a treaty, Congress has no formal or official role in dealing with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The Senate would ratify if the President signed it. So it's not...
That would be after?
Right. So it's not in play on the Hill right now.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily something that we can't talk about because Congress and these leaders can help generate the will to get the country to move on this. But at this point, it's not in play. There's not a spot.
There is like a parliamentarians sign on that I believe Congress members could sign on to. I think just the thing I would say is that this would be for your members of Congress who are our strongest allies, because the ones who are really in our corner on nuclear weapons issues already, this would be something that you could bring to that office. But for most members of Congress, it's probably a non-starter.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind everybody that there is a Nuclear Weapons Abolition and Economic and Energy Conversion Act in the U.S. Congress that Eleanor Holmes Norton keeps introducing, and we're going to be working with her on improving the language. And if anybody wants to talk about what these fellows have been pointing out so clearly, it's about money. Well, there is a conversion bill, and we should be promoting conversion because we need to find solutions. As long as we're hammering away at the problems, we don't really get very far. But if we say, well, here is a way to change what you guys are doing, and we'll pay you to change what you're doing, then maybe they'll start listening to us.
I would definitely like to learn more. That sounds interesting.
Right.
Yeah, we have had success before working with fiscal conservatives to delay things until they eventually are forgotten about or pushed so far to the side. So speaking with and coalescing around people who are fiscally conservative has been a good strategy. And regarding dealing with their emotions, it's, somebody crying on someone's shoulder is different from, especially if the interaction is based on maybe a personal loss or something like that, is probably very different from, you know, exercising a great deal of passion in a conversation with somebody who is not on your side either. So I think in dealing with some of these folks, just focusing on the fact that this money is going just flying out the window. And you indicated that you were fiscal conservative, might be more useful than, you know, hyping them up with the emotional part.
I just had a quick comment on that for the bills on the use policies that are not about budgets. There are 2 Republicans who have co-sponsored in the House, and I believe that the reason that they've co-sponsored is because they are diehard Constitution believers and want to stick to the word of the Constitution, because it is the Constitution that gives Congress the ability to declare war. Yeah. So that is another argument that you could use in your offices that are, maybe Republican offices, about the constitutionality question.
2 quick questions. One is waste streams from pit production and UPF that we're dealing, especially at Savannah Riverside, we're a dual site weapons and cleanup site, as a valid point. Should we move into that? And the other is the swamp. Waste, abuse, fraud, mismanagement. I know that's MOX, and we're not specifically using that as one of our asks now. We're concentrating on pits, but the contractor fees and all that, is that fair game, or should we, that's going too much in the weeds?
That's absolutely fair game. The National Institution of Security Administration consistently tops the Government Accountability Office of bad agencies.
Right.
That are, because they're so mismanaged, because they have such a lack of accountability, they are rife for fraud and corruption. So absolutely go to the swamp if you're familiar with that and you want to go there, because everybody should be against the swamp. Even if Trump is the guy who made it a popular term, everybody should be against it.
And that may help that gentleman, rather than cry or scream, is to sidle up to that argument.
Is that a website, the swamp?
Should be. I think we're in it. We're in it right now. It's an actual physical location.
Okay, I thought so.
In terms of waste stream, I feel like that's really specific to Savannah River site if you're going to delve into that, because it's different at each site. We know what Y-12 is dealing with, piled on top of what's piled there is different than what's happening in Los Alamos and in Savannah River.
Well, the major pit production was at Rocky Flats, as I understand initially.
Yes.
Correct?
Which stopped at 1989.
Right, and then it was shipped, a lot of that.
To Idaho.
Right. Oh, none to SRS? I thought so.
The waste was shipped to Idaho. The usable plutonium was shipped to Savannah.
SRS.
Yeah.
Okay.
To emphasize something that both of you brought up, the GAO thing is called the high-risk list. You can Google that. I think it was in 1990 that GAO started it. The Department of Energy has the singular distinction of being on that list every year. So for 27 years, it's been on that high-risk list. Government Accountability Office, which is an investigative arm of Congress.
Which is not just boom, it's this stuff.
Yeah, and it's about fraud, waste, and abuse.
And mismanagement.
And mismanagement, yeah.
Ms. Slade, we haven't heard from you.
So I have a question about the first use legislation. I was wondering if there's any, if there's been a legislation like that proposed in the past, so thinking about fostering bipartisan support, certainly the constitutionality argument makes sense, and I'm just wondering if there's any history of these ideas being thrown out there, maybe that would help frame that position from being reactive to the current president, even though that might be warranted.
Yeah. So my understanding is that in 2017, there was a Senate hearing on the president's ability to use nuclear weapons first, and that was the first time it had been discussed in Congress for decades. I don't know exactly, like 30, 40 years,
yes.
I believe.
Yeah.
So this is actually like the first time we're having this debate since the Cold War. So unfortunately, no. There are some high-profile Republicans who, used to be in office. I feel like Henry Kissinger and I forget who the one before, William Perry, but he was a Democrat, right?
No, Perry.
Sam Nunn.
Sam Nunn, George
Sam
Shultz.
Nunn was Democrat.
There were, yeah. So there are some high-profile Republicans who have come out saying, that we need a different stance towards nuclear weapons. We need to work for disarmament. We need to reduce the risks of our weapons with policies like this. So you can draw on those names, but yeah, this is the first time we're really having this debate.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little more detail on what Lily was talking about around the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons does have a parliamentary pledge. They asked us to reword it because people in Congress in the United States are very special and they don't like or possibly understand how parliamentary might apply to them. Yeah. So we've rebranded it as the Congressional Pledge.
Oh, great.
But I do have copies here, and this is something that, like you said, should really at least start with our top allies. Because while it's a pretty moderate ask in this room, it's a major ask in their rooms. So yeah, I have copies. If anyone is meeting with someone who might be a candidate, just see me and I'll hand them over.
Let's ask Marky when we give him his award.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way.
You all will probably have time for one more quick question.
I'd like to add to something that he said in following up, and that is that Norton's bill is the first clause is calling for treaty, and so this going with supporting Norton's bill for conversion work together really well. Come with us tomorrow.
I'm really interested in what
all right, good.
Do we know anything about the awardees that you know that we don't know? The people that, like Barbara Lee and Ed Markey, I know they've always, especially...
We know we like them, but you know that.
They're champions. I mean, Barbara Lee's been really active quite recently. Didn't I hear something? I can't recall which...
But I think those would be the kinds of people that you could bring this pledge to.
Right.
And we are to invite people still to this awards thing?
There will be an invitation in every one of the packets that people, and there will be other invitations at headquarters. There always are a staff, and you can take and invite anybody you want to. So yes. And Kathy may have sent out, but there's also an electronic version of that. So ask her, she can email it to you, and you can email it to people.
Can we thank our panelists?
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Available during lunch.
Yeah.
Thanks about that time.